بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله ما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So the last time that we met, we were discussing the issue of al-Qadar, al-Qadar wal-Qadar, and in the last lesson that we had, we were looking at the different groups who deviated on the subject of al-Qadar. And so from them we said there were those who were the extremists in denying al-Qadar, Ghullatul Qadariyya, and we said that they said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not know the actions of His servants before they occur. So they denied the knowledge, Allah's prior knowledge of events. So they denied this from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in fact they denied all of the levels of al-Qadar, so they were the extremists in al-Qadar. Then we had what we call the main body of the Qadariyya, who are the Mu'tazila, because they took this innovation in the 2nd century and they carried it. And so they denied the first two levels of al-Qadar. So they said that Allah has knowledge of everything that will occur, and they said that Allah has written down everything that will occur. But as for Allah willing the actions of the servants and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creating the actions of the servants, they denied this. They denied these two levels of al-Qadar. Then we had so these were the people who denied al-Qadar. On the other side we had the people who exaggerated in al-Qadar. So from the first of those groups, who are the extremists, are the Jahmiyyah. They said that everything that takes place is the action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That everything that everyone does is forced by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one has any choice, and it is the actual action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And wa alaikum assalam. And then we had the Ash'a'ira, the Ash'aris, and they said that, again very similar to the Jahmiyyah, and they said that the actions of Allah, that they are what takes place amongst the servants, that this is the action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is Allah who is really acting, but the servant really is just a place or a repository in which those Allah's actions are taking place, and the servant gains a benefit or a reward for what Allah does in or through the body of that servant. So the point being that these were the groups who deviated and went astray, and they went astray in the 4 levels of al-Qadr that we discussed. We discussed some other issues connected to that, to do with Allah's wisdom, hikmah, Allah's justice, and the issue of qudra. So today we want to finish off this discussion, inshallah ta'ala, with another topic which is connected. And this topic, when we look in the books of Aqidah, it is referred to as al-istita'ah. Al-istita'ah. So when you look in the books of Aqidah, you will see that they will often discuss an issue which is called al-istita'ah. Al-istita'ah means having the ability or the power. And likewise, so what does this relate to? What this relates to is the whole issue of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala aiding a servant, helping His servant in his deeds, in his actions. And so the question arises that when we speak of Allah helping a servant to do deeds, to do righteous deeds, this help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when does it take place? And where does it take place? Does it take place before a servant has done the action? Or does it take place whilst the servant is doing the action? Now this is a question. This is the question now. And so we have to really, to help us answer this question, we have to understand 2 of Allah's attributes. There are two attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala which are connected to this issue. What are those two attributes? Those two attributes are al-adl, which is justice, and al-hikmah, which is al-wisdom, Allah's wisdom. These are two attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-adl wal-hikmah, and these are connected to this whole issue of Allah aiding the servant and supporting the servant in doing what he is supposed to do. So this will help us to answer the question, at what point and where is Allah's aid in effect? Is it before the servant has done anything? Is it whilst the servant is doing the actual action? Or is it in both situations? So as we said, let's look at these two attributes, Allah's adl, Allah's justice. So as what we say, that from Allah's attribute of justice, al-adl, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has aided and supported every single servant to perform the obligations which Allah has put upon him before the actual action. Now what does this mean? This means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given the people intellect. So a person has aql, with which he can understand and which he can distinguish between right and wrong. Likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to the people the fitrah. The fitrah is something that is inside, it is the natural disposition, it is something by which we know that something is right and something is wrong, to a certain degree. That worshipping Allah alone is the truth. And how we know that whether something is oppression or something is justice, things like that. So the fitrah is something that Allah has put in every single individual. So we have the fitrah, that which a child is born upon. And we have the aql. Allah gives aql to the people. Likewise, He also sent messengers to them. This is a third type of support and aid. He sent messengers to the people. And likewise, and also revealed books, that would come into the same thing, that He also sent books to them. This is another type of support and aid that Allah gave to His servants in order to help them fulfill the obligations. That's the fourth one. He sent books. And the fifth one, He gave them qudra. He gave them qudra, meaning that we actually have ability and power and means by which to do actions. We have qudra, we have limbs, we have power, we have ability. So look at how all of these five things, this is from the adl, the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He gave i'ana. He gave aid and support to His servants before they do any actions. What are those five again? Let's mention them again. So we said that He gave them aql, intellect, by which they can distinguish right and wrong and understand. He gave them fitrah. Fitrah is the natural inclination that every child is born upon, by which he knows certain things instinctively. He doesn't need to be told them, he knows them instinctively. The fitrah. Thirdly, He sent the messengers. Fourthly, He sent the books. Fifthly, He gave them qudra. He gave them physical ability and capacity. So we see that if any person is prevented from any of these things, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala removes the burden of obligation from him. For example, if a person doesn't have aql, if a person, let's say, is insane, he has no aql, is he now going to be held responsible by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And the answer is no, because when a person loses his aql, then the taklif, meaning the burden of obligation, is removed from him. Okay? Likewise, a person to whom the message of the messengers never reached, again, this person is excused. He will be excused and he will be tested on Yawm al-Qiyamah, but he's excused. And likewise, people who lose the hearing and the sight and all of these things, who they lose their faculties, we see that here these people will be excused, and Allah has not obligated upon them certain things in the Sharia. Because why? They have not received the i'ana, the aid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because this is from Allah's Qadar, and so therefore they will be dealt with in a certain way. So this is what we mean that this is from the adl of Allah, that He has aided His servants to help them fulfill what they are supposed to do. Okay, that's the first attribute. The second attribute that we need to understand is the hikmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is al-Hakim, He is wise, and He has wisdom. And so from His wisdom is that when He sees a servant of His who wishes for guidance, he wants to be guided, he wants to be upon the correct path, he wants the correct way, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open up His chest. He will open up His chest and He will make easy for him the path to guidance. This is from Allah's hikmah. And likewise, when a person who refuses guidance, despite the fact that Allah has already aided him, so remember, we've already said that Allah has given i'ana, He's already aided from His adl to every single servant. He has given aql, fitra, messengers, books, qudra. So now if someone comes along and he refuses the guidance, even after Allah has given him aid for that, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will abandon him and leave him and cause his heart to deviate, and will seal his hearing and will seal his seeing. Although he hears and sees, he can't really hear and see. Okay? And so we see that this second issue of Allah's hikmah is the aid of Allah at the time of the action. Do you understand? So we said that with Allah's adl, Allah gave support and aid prior to the servant doing the action. So all these things, Allah gave aql, Allah put the fitrah in the people, sent messengers, books, gave qudra. All of these are things that Allah gave as aid and support before the person actually does any action. Then, this is Allah's adl. As for the hikmah, this is at the point of a servant doing an action. So whomever Allah sees, his heart wants guidance, he seeks guidance, he pursues guidance, Allah will at that point aid him and support him and give him i'an. He will give him a support and aid in doing that which is correct and in guiding his actions. And he will guide him aright. And the one who refuses the guidance, despite Allah aiding him in all those ways, then at that point Allah will abandon him, cause his heart to deviate, seal his hearing and seeing, and so on and so forth. And this is what we mean when we speak of Allah's aid at the time of the action. So now we have two issues, as we said. Allah, this is related to the issue of al-istita'a, as we said, and al-i'ana. The servant having the ability and Allah aiding the servant. Okay, so we have the adl of Allah and we have the hikmah of Allah. From the adl of Allah, justice is that He aids a servant before he does anything. And from the hikmah, the justice of Allah, the wisdom of Allah, is that at the point of the servant doing the action, He will help him either way, one way or the other. If he accepts guidance, Allah will open up his chest. If he refuses guidance, Allah will misguide him. Okay, so this is Allah at the point of the actions of the servants. Okay, so now this is the position of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah. What is the position of the groups who went astray? Because this is the whole point of this discussion, to make sure that we understand these affairs. So the Mu'tazila, they said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they accepted Allah's adl, and they said that Allah has indeed aided the servant before he does any action. Allah has sent books, messengers, gave aql, gave fitrah. So they affirmed this part, this aspect, this attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or as in the sending of the messages and so on and so forth. And then, as for the aid of Allah at the point of doing the action, they rejected this. Why did they reject this? Because they said that if Allah was to aid some people but not aid other people, how can this be just? How can this be justice? It wouldn't make sense. So they denied the second part, the hikmah of Allah, as in Allah aiding some people who pursue guidance and misguiding some people who don't want guidance, who want misguidance. So they said this doesn't make sense. this would mean that Allah is unjust. Well, how can Allah help some people and not help other people? This does not make sense. So therefore they said that we affirm that the servant has ability and power and is aided before the action, but not during the action. Rather the servant, that he does everything purely from his own accord. That the servant creates his own actions. Allah is not, there's no role of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when a servant actually does his action. So from this angle, this is why we say about them that they really affirm two creators, a creator of good and a creator of evil, because essentially they are saying that a servant creates his own actions. Because they were trying to, get this idea of justice, because they were trying to say that justice can only be when a servant acts on his own accord, outside of the will of Allah, outside of the Allah giving him, Allah willing his actions and creating his actions and so on and so forth, and aiding him and supporting him in what he is doing, outside of that. So this was the Mu'tazila. As for the Ash'aris, then they said, what they said is that a servant is aided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only at the point of doing the action. And then they exaggerated in this issue to such a degree that it was as if Allah is the one who's doing the action and the servant is not really doing the action. Okay? And what they were trying to do is they were trying to say that everything that takes place is in fact done by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that this is from the tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to describe every action only to Him. And that if we were to ascribe any actions to other than Allah, this would conflict with tawheed. So they now exaggerated in another direction. They said, that's it, what they mean by this is, for example, let's say a person is going to give charity or he's going to pray, then in reality the qudra behind doing the action is something that was created by Allah there and then at that point. And the servant didn't really have any real role in it at all. So really the action is actually that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So this is the end result of what they were trying to say and what they were trying to do. So the Mu'tazila basically, they said, the person is the one who is doing the action of his own accord outside of the will and the creation of Allah. And the Ash'ariyah, they said that actually it is the action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And really the servant has very little role in it. So they went to the other extreme. So in other words, when a person prays, it is essentially Allah who is doing the action. When a person fornicates or drinks, it is essentially Allah doing doing the action or performing the action. Essentially, this is the kind of idea that we are moving towards when they exaggerated in this issue of this issue of the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this leads us then to come to the summary. What do we say? Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah say Allah has aided a servant before he does any action and whilst he does the action. Right? So we affirm. And this is from the adl of Allah and the hikmah of Allah. Allah is just and Allah is wise. These two things combined mean that Allah sent us messengers and books, gave us aql and fitra, and gave us qudra. So He gave all of this to us from His justice. And then when He saw the one who wanted that and pursued that guidance, then He guided him even further. He gave him aid and support. And when He saw the one who refused all of that and didn't want any of that and turned away from that, then He misguided him and sealed his heart out of wisdom. All of this is from Allah's wisdom. Right? So this is how we tie everything together. Everything makes sense. Everything is just, is from Allah's wisdom. But as for the groups of innovation, then from them were those who said, yes, we accept Allah sent and aided the people by sending messengers before they did any actions. But as for when they did actions, then Allah has no role in that at all. Allah. And then the Ash'aris, the other way around, they say Allah did not help anyone prior to doing the action. Rather, He only aided them when they did the actual action. And even then, it is Allah really who is doing the action. Right? So they turn things the other way around. So here, obviously, we see now that there are some problems that they face. So to summarize, what do we say? When we explain things in this way, there's no conflict between what Allah creates in the creation and what takes place, and Allah's adl. The fact that Allah is just and what we see taking place around us. There's no conflict between this and that. Allah is the creator of everything, and He does not wrong anybody in the least. So whether someone is guided, whether someone is misguided, no one has been wronged in the least. Right? So we can reconcile between these two things. Whereas the Mu'tazila have a problem, and the Ash'ariyah, they have a problem. They can't reconcile between these two things. Okay, we put these two things, that Allah indeed creates everything, even the actions of the servants. The Mu'tazila can't understand this. To them, if Allah creates the actions of the servants, where's the idea of justice gone? To them, this is a conflict, right? And to the Ash'aris, Allah is the doer of everything. Because this is only from Tawheed. How can you say a servant has his own qudra, which has its own effect? Right? So they're trying to say that everything is Allah's action again, which is an exaggeration, which is not the truth. Also, that's the first point. The second point is, there is no conflict between the Sharia, what Allah commands, and between al-Qadar, what takes place. Allah has commanded us, right? There's no conflict between that and between al-Qadar, in the sense that Allah has given us power and choice. We have qudra, we have ikhtiyar, we have the ability to choose and to act. There's no conflict between these two things. They actually come together. So the Sharia by which He said, do such and such and keep away from such and such, and likewise the Qadar by which He gave us the qudra, there's no conflict between those two things. Likewise, there's no conflict between Allah creating the actions of the servants. So Allah created all of our actions. What we do is a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no conflict between that and between the fact that we indeed do have our own power and ability by which we do those actions. Because Allah created the servants, and the servants have the power over their own actions. Okay? We bring these two things together. There's no conflict, there's no contradiction. Allah created us and gave us power. From that power, we choose to do actions. So Allah is the creator of all of the actions. There's no conflict. Okay, there's no conflict between any of that. As opposed to what the Mu'tazila say. The Mu'tazila say, how can Allah be the creator of the actions? Where then does the idea of justice come from? No, we don't believe this. We believe Allah knows and He wrote, but as for willing and doing, the servant does that outside of Allah's control and power. Right? Because they can't reconcile all of these things with the idea of justice. The fourth point, there is no conflict and contradiction between al-Qadar and the ways and the means, the asbab. We covered this, we discussed this in one of the previous lessons, that we have al-Qadar and we have what we call the ways and the means, the asbab. There's no conflict between these two things, because Allah has determined that the best way to explain this is to say, let's say for example that Allah has willed 50,000 years before He decreed the creation that Abdullah is going to have a child. This now is decreed, this is from Allah's Qadar. But then Allah also created the asbab, the ways and means. And the ways and means to have children is through marriage. And so on and so forth. So there is Qadar and there is the asbab, the ways and means. And they go hand in hand. We put these two together. So Allah decrees, yes, and the asbab have an effect. They actually have a true and real effect. And again, we explained this previously. We said that, for example, to understand this point more fully, we say, for example, that Allah has decreed 50,000 years before He created the creation, that at a certain point in time, a person who is thirsty, he will drink water, and his thirst will be removed. His thirst will be removed. Okay, so this is from Allah's Qadar. That a person will be thirsty, his thirst will be removed. But what is the ways and the means through which Allah has created ways and means? So Allah created water. Allah gave that water a certain inherent quality. When a person drinks that water, his thirst has been removed. Okay, so we see no conflict between affirming Allah's Qadar and the asbab, the ways and means through which the things which Allah has already decreed will take place. Okay, so we see no conflict between these two things, and everything is from the Qadar of Allah, the Qadar itself, and likewise the asbab, the ways and means. All of this is from the Qadar of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we put all of these things together, whereas again, the other groups who deviate, they see this as a contradiction. So they would say, for example, as I explained before in a previous lesson, that like the Ash'aris, they will say that when a person drinks the water had nothing to do with removing the thirst. Rather, Allah created the removal of the thirst at that point in time to coincide with the drinking of the water. So they deny that Allah has put inherent properties and qualities in things. And this is incorrect, this is false, this is not true. Okay, so we as Ahlul Sunnah, we see there's no contradiction between al-Qadar and the asbab, the ways and the means, between the Qadr of Allah and between the asbab, the ways and means that He puts in the creation. So all of this, inshallah, is centered around the discussion as to how Allah aids His servants to help them do the obligations which they are supposed to do. Right, so this ends our discussion of al-istita'a and al-i'ana. We now come to the final point, inshallah, in our discussion of al-Qadar, which is, okay, what about the arguments where a person uses al-Qadar to justify his actions or to justify his behavior? This is what we call al-ihtijaj bil-Qadar. Al-ihtijaj bil-Qadar, meaning to use al-Qadar as an excuse, as an argument to justify one's behavior. And so we have a principle as Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah. We have a principle that is mentioned by the scholars, and they say al-ihtijaj bil-Qadar ala al-musiba. The arguing by way of al-Qadar is only for that which is a calamity. Now when a calamity comes to you, then you can use Qadar as an argument to say, yes, this happened by way of al-Qadar. But as for anything blameworthy, when you are at fault, when there's something blameworthy, then the argument of al-Qadar cannot be used. So we have al-masa'ib, that which we call al-masa'ib, which are calamities which come to a person, like maybe an accident or death or an illness or something like this. And there are ma'aib. Ma'aib are the faults that we have, our own faults, our mistakes, errors that we fall into in our actions. So al-Qadar can be used for the first category, but it cannot be used for the second category. Okay, now we will explain this further, inshallah ta'ala. So Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, they believe that when a servant does a sin, when a person falls into a sin, he does something which is haram, he does something which is unlawful, or he fails to do something which is wajib. Maybe, he misses a prayer, for example. Maybe he does something which is haram. Right? So when a person commits a sin, then we call this is from the ma'ayib, meaning those things for which a person can be faulted, that we blame him and criticize him for falling into these things. So in this situation, it is wajib for him to make istighfar, to seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these are things that we see occurred from the prophets, by way of example, from Adam alayhi salam, and from Nuh alayhi salam, and Musa alayhi salam. So they fell into certain things, and so they made tawbah and they made istighfar to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the error that they fell into. And so Allah accepted this from them. Right? So this is what we call the ma'ayib, meaning those things that a person falls into from which he can be blamed, and for which he has to make tawbah to Allah and make istighfar. So with respect to these issues, we cannot use al-Qadar as an argument. So for example, if a person says that yes, Allah decreed that I was going to drink, or that I was going to gamble, so I have an excuse because Allah decreed. This argument here is false. This is wrong. Because we can use the same argument to this person, we can go to him, and we can maybe, break his leg, or slap him on the face and say, Allah decreed that this was supposed to happen. So you can't blame me either for this. So this shows that his argument is false. Because if he then argues and says, no, this is injustice, then you've destroyed your argument. Because then it is also injustice for you not to follow what Allah has ordered you to do. So your argument doesn't follow. This is wrong. So therefore, there is no argument for falling into sin. Rather, you have to make tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have to make istighfar to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in this, there is no argument from al-Qadar. Because Allah, from His adl, He gave you aid. He sent messengers, books, gave you aql, fitra and qudra. He guided you in all those respects. He aided you. Okay, so there's no argument. However, there are other things that Allah has decreed, which might result, which Allah brings about as a result of people falling into sin. So we know in the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned that whatever calamity befalls you, or whatever thing comes to you, it is from your own hands. It is from what your own hands have earned. So we see that the scholars mention that whatever we see of calamities, of illness and sickness and disease and loss of life and natural disasters and so on and so forth, all of this really is from Allah's wisdom in punishing the people and purifying the people for what their hands have earned. So these are what we call the masa'ib. These are now the masa'ib. These are the calamities that we see happening around us. So now with respect to the masa'ib, these masa'ib happen why? Because of a wisdom from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is a wisdom behind them. That's why they take place. And they are from Allah's qadar. With respect to these issues, it is permissible for us to use qadar as an argument. It is permissible to use al-Qadar as an argument. And this is how we understand the action of Adam alayhi salam when he used the qadar of Allah as an argument. That it was decreed for him to be expelled from paradise. This is now a musibah. This is a calamity. But Allah had decreed it before. So when he argued with Musa alayhi salam, then his argument by way of al-Qadar for a musibah was correct. But he did not use Qadar as an argument when he disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by taking from the tree. You see the difference? So for the musibah, for the calamity, it is permissible for us to use al-Qadar as an argument. And so we see, for example, to give some examples, let's say a person was driving his car and he was hit by another car. So it was an accident, for example, and so he's harmed. And so the person who he shouldn't have been driving fast in the first place. He feels remorseful and he says, I was wrong to do this. Here it is permissible for him to say that this was from Allah's decree. Allah decreed that I was going to be travelling fast. I couldn't escape from this and it happened. So although I'm remorseful, I have an excuse that it was from Allah's qadar. In this situation, we can use qadar as an argument. We can use qadar as an argument. And likewise, if a person, he reached the age of 40 years of age, he never prayed before this. He never prayed, he never fasted. Then he reaches the age of 40. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He guides him to the prayer. He guides him to the truth. Then he starts praying and he starts fasting and so on and so forth. Now if someone comes along and says to him, oh so-and-so, why did you abandon prayer for 30, 40 years of your life? This is wrong. Because that person can use qadar as an argument. He can say, well, Allah decreed, whatever Allah decreed happened. And here in that case it is permissible because he has made tawbah from the fault and his wrong action, his wrong behavior. Okay, because he made tawbah from that. And what happened before was from what Allah decreed upon him. But as for the person who doesn't pray, doesn't fast, and then you command him and says, then you command him and you say, you should pray, you should fast, and then he says, it is from the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I don't pray and don't fast. Right, now this is false argument. This is incorrect. Because now he's using al-Qadar to justify his fault and his sin and his disobedience. And this is misguidance. This is clear misguidance. So what do we take from this? We take from this that with Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah we have a principle that we can use al-Qadar as an argument for the masa'ib, for the calamities that happen and befall, that we see happening all around us. But we cannot use al-Qadar as an argument for the ma'aib, meaning those faults that people fall into, which is sin and disobedience, and not acting upon what Allah has ordered, not keeping away from what Allah has prohibited. Then it cannot be used in that at all. This brings us to the end of the issue of al-Qadar, or some of the other masail or the issues connected to al-Qadar. If there are any questions on this before we continue, because we now move on to a new topic inshallah ta'ala in this book that we're going through. So before I move on to introduce the next topic very briefly, is there any questions? I know sometimes this can be a complicated topic. Is there any questions on this subject?
You mentioned at the beginning of the class al-Adl, and then you mentioned that it's given prior to the person doing the action. Did you say that
al-Qudra?
What was it?
Yeah. So what we are speaking of here is basically we're talking about al-i'ana. We are speaking about Allah aiding His servants prior to them doing anything or doing any actions.
Al-i'ana.
Al-i'ana. Al-i'an. This is what we call Allah's aiding and supporting.
Sorry. What was al-Adl?
Al-Adl is justice. Al-Adl is the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in giving aid and support to His servants.
Okay.
By those 5 things.
Yes. Akal, fitra.
That's right, yeah.
And is al-Adl given... Oh, sorry if I'm getting it wrong again. Is al-Adl given prior to the person doing the action?
No.
Is that al-i'ana?
Al-Adl is the attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay.
Allah is just.
Okay.
From Allah's justice is that He gives aid. So it's the i'ana that we're talking about. Yeah. Meaning Allah's aid that He gives to the servants.
Okay.
Yeah.
So al-i'ana is the thing that is given prior to
yes.
the person doing the
Yes.
action.
And from that i'ana is the aql, fitra, messengers, books, and qudra, meaning that He has given us physical ability, right, by which we can act and do things and so on and so forth, all right, upon the actions. So Allah has given us limbs and a mouth and a tongue and faculties by which we can pray, we can fast, we can do good, we can give charity, we can be good to the parents, we can do this. All of this is the qudra that Allah has given to the servant. So in all these ways, Allah has aided the servants. This is from Allah's adl. He's just. Yeah.
And at the end you mentioned about al-ihtijaj.
Al-ihtijaj bil-qadar.
That, for example, you were giving a misal about a person that doesn't read for 40 years.
Yeah.
And then he starts reading.
Yeah.
Now can he blame that on
right.
al-ihtijaj?
At the time of him not praying,
yes.
Obviously he is to blame.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. But when Allah guides him,
yes.
and now shows him the right way,
yes.
right? Now he can say, yes, indeed, it was from al-Qadar. So that Allah had decreed. Yeah. So this was like a bit of a complex example to give, because it really has 2 elements to it, really.
Yes.
But at the point where he was not acting, if he had tried to use the argument of al-Qadar, we would reject it from him. But now that Allah has guided him to the truth, he started praying, realized the error of his ways. In this case, now he can argue, then yes, indeed, it was from the qadr of Allah that I didn't used to pray, but alhamdulillah, Allah now guided me, so now this is acceptable. Yeah, now this is acceptable because, yeah.
Same example, you mentioned the second part, that because he's done tawbah, that's why he can't use it.
Yeah.
What happens if he's not prayed for 40 years, then he starts praying, but he doesn't make the tawbah, then can he still use the same argument?
No, I mean, if he starts praying, essentially that would count as a tawbah, If he started praying again, that would really count as a tawbah and changing his ways. So it wouldn't really change the argument here, which is that, he could argue that yes, it was from Allah's Qadar that I didn't used to pray, but now I'm praying. So it wouldn't really change the situation. Come to you, yeah, inshallah. Yeah, yeah.
You mentioned the distinguishment between the differences of arguing for al-Qadar with musibah, calamities.
Yeah.
I think I've distinguished in my head, I don't know if this is correct,
Yeah.
that you can blame al-Qadar when it's past, and when it's present and future, you can't. Is that correct?
That's kind of correct, but it doesn't address what the issue comes down to is what thing are you applying it to, and not necessarily the time, right? So as for that which is past, then if you committed sins, yes, they were from the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you hadn't repented from them, then you can't use qadr as an excuse. If you have repented from them, now qadr can be an excuse, like the example of the man who, as we said, didn't used to pray. So I think the classification really is in terms of what type of act is it applying to, the musibah or the faults and the errors and the sins and so on and so forth. But as for present and future, that wouldn't come into it because the thing hasn't happened yet, and you couldn't, I suppose if you said, right, tomorrow I'm going to not pray because it's from Allah's Qadar, a person wouldn't really think like that. This is false thinking. Like someone could say, well, tomorrow I'm going to kill you because it's from Allah's Qadar, right? So where do you it's wrong. It's wrong. So you can't. So in terms of things what's happening in the future, then obviously that's a separate matter altogether. Yeah.
Sorry, I missed the point, Abu Iyaad, which is that on al-Iyana, was it given prior and during?
Yeah, because the whole issue of i'ana and istita'a is to do with prior to and at the time that a servant does the action. Yeah. So what that means is, the reason why this is important is because, let's say for example, the time for Isha is going to come, and the person now is going to pray, right? Has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given aid to that person by, for example, giving him the means of conveyance to come to the masjid, right? Making him fit and healthy at that point in time to be able to do wudu, right? Physically able to, come to the prayer. All these things are from the i'ana of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the point of doing the action. So the question now is that is this from Allah? And is Allah helping the servant at the time of the action, not just before the action? Like sending messengers, sending books, the commands, prohibitions, giving aql, giving the body, qudra, whatever. Right? And we believe, yes, it happens in both situations. Right? This allows us to be different from the two groups that we mentioned. Because the Mu'tazila are saying that, oh, no, you can't say that Allah is helping the servant to do the prayer, for example. No. Because that would mean, how come Allah is helping some servants to do righteousness, but not helping other servants who are falling into sin? Where's the idea of adl? And there's no justice here, because they couldn't fathom this idea in their mind. So they said, right, no, Allah is not helping anybody. Right? Yes, He's helped them beforehand. He sent messengers, books, gave them qudrat, and so on and so forth. But the point of doing the action, it is purely the servant himself, of his own accord, of his own qudra, that is doing everything, outside of Allah's control. Right? Because they try to come with a twisted idea of justice. And as a result of which they said, there are the actions of the creation, they create their own actions, and there is Allah that does His actions. So they ended up with having two creators essentially. And as for the Ash'aris, they went to the other extreme and said, yes, that when a servant is doing something, is actually Allah who's the qudra is from Allah. The servant has no effect in his actions whatsoever. They went to the other extreme and exaggerated and made it look as if Allah is doing the actual action. So all of this comes, as I said, all of this is tied together to the idea of Allah's justice, Allah's wisdom. And so as you've seen, that we are able to reconcile all these things together into a unified, we have a unified whole. There's no conflict anywhere with Ahlul Sunnah. The conflict is with Ahlul Bidah. So all those things come together. Allah's creation, Allah's adl, the Sharia and Qadar, the Qadar and the Asbab, the ways and means, as we said, Allah creating the servants, giving them Qudra, and the servants using that Qudra to do actions. All this we can reconcile it, together. We have no problem at all with any of that. Yeah.
Some matters, like for example rain, right? When it starts we say it's rahmah.
Yeah.
But if it's raining for 3 days we say it's musibah.
Yeah.
I mean, where do we draw the line? Ulama, any guidance on this?
Yeah, so your question was that sometimes we know that rain can be a blessing, sometimes rain can be punishment. When we have, for example, excessive downpour of rain and a flood and so on and so forth. So we say that, the rain, the same thing in and of itself can be both things. It can be a rahmah from Allah, it can also be a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just like even, for example, things which are favors and blessings to us can actually be a punishment at the same time. Like for example, a person is given many good things of wealth and food, and which appear to be blessings, but really it's actually a punishment of Allah, in the sense that Allah is opening him up to the doors of goodness and using that, he becomes ungrateful. So he sees it as a blessing, but really it's actually a punishment.
So if I misjudge that, will I be sinful then?
If you misjudge what, sorry?
If I say this is a musibah rather than saying it's a rahmah.
No, if it's a musibah and we see that there's harm that has come to people, maybe a person's wealth has been destroyed, his house has been destroyed, maybe there's been loss of life by way of a flood or excessive rain or something, or maybe there's great inconvenience to people because the homes have been flooded or whatever, we can say, yes, this is a musibah. This is a musibah. And this musibah is from the hikmah of Allah, as we said, because from the hikmah of Allah is that because people wrong themselves and commit sins, then there are calamities which arise. Right? So any harm that comes to the people, we say this is a musibah, we can say there's no problem with that. But we tie it to the hikmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from Allah's wisdom. And what Allah intends by that is to punish those who deserve punishment, or to remove sin from those people, who have sinned with them, so that they become purified. So we can have many different reasons behind what we see taking place of the calamities. So if you said it was a calamity, there wouldn't be any harm, because it is a calamity. Even like as the Messenger said, that even the prick that a believer has from a thorn is something that expiates from him the sins. In hadith, likewise the Messenger said that how amazing is the affair of the believer. In all of his affairs there is good. If some blessing or favor comes to him, he praises and thanks Allah, and that is good for him. If a calamity comes to him, he has patience, and that is good for him. So there's no harm in describing something as a calamity when it is a calamity and it brings harm upon the people. The issue comes down to is that it's from the hikmah of Allah, and Allah could be intending different things behind that calamity. Okay, I think we reached the time for Isha. So what we'll do, inshallah ta'ala, we will conclude our discussion here on al-Qadar. And so this brings us now to the next chapter in the topic, which is to do with the levels of the religion of Islam. In Islam, there are 3 levels. There is Islam, and then there is Iman, and there is Ihsan. And these are the 3 levels of the religion, and there is a connection between them all. And so this relates to the whole discussion of Iman. What is Iman? What is the reality of Iman? And so inshallah this will be our next subject that we will start in the next lesson, inshallah ta'ala. So we conclude the lesson on al-Qadar. Just a quick announcement, I believe there's a lecture tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala, at 7:30. There'll be a lecture on the book which is written by Sheikh Abdurrahman bin Nasr al-Sa'di rahimahullah, one of the great scholars of the last century. He wrote a book, How to Attain Happiness in Life. This will be the second part of the lecture, and by our brother Abu Hakim Bilal Davis, Jazawullah Khair. And this will be tomorrow at 7:30. Everyone is welcome. Try to bring your friends, family, inshallah, to benefit. It is a great little booklet by the Sheikh, and inshallah you will benefit a great deal from it. So that's tomorrow. And so with that we conclude today's lesson. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Time for Isha, inshallah.